Hello, and welcome to this week's Bible study. For those watching on YouTube, if you wouldn't mind doing a quick breathing exercise with me, it's just going to be 3 deep breaths. So we're going to start in. Right. And for those of you who don't know, I like to start the videos, or I like to start the Bible study with a quiet worship song, but I can't actually play the songs here because of very stupid copyright restrictions. So what I would like you to do instead is in the description for those watching on YouTube, it should be right at the top. There's a link for a quiet worship song, and if you want to just click on that, listen to it, maybe keep doing your deep breathing, meditate on the lyrics, or maybe sing along if you know the words. And when you're done with the song, then you can come back and you can listen to the actual Bible study. So if you want to pause the video right now. And you're back. I hope you enjoyed the worship song. It's a bit of a classic, old folksy classic. So yeah, we're getting into chapter 11 today. That's exciting. So, I thought it might be fun to switch up the translation again, or the Bible translation that I use. I talked before about how I started with the ESV translation, but then I accidentally started using the NIV translation, and by the time I realized it, I thought maybe it'd be cool to make it a thing I do. At first I thought I'd just go back and forth between ESV and NIV every 5 chapters, since those are the translations that I'm most familiar and comfortable with. But then I thought it'd be even more interesting to let all the translations take a turn every 5 chapters, so we can really step out of our bubble and compare the other versions, maybe see why we use them and stuff. Could be an interesting experiment. I probably won't do King James, since only completely insane people can get through those, and I'm only partially insane, so I'm probably not going to do that, but I'll probably give the new King James a shot at some point. For these current chapters, however, we're going to be using the New Revised Standard Version, because out of curiosity, I googled what the best translation was, which, by the way, is this ridiculous question that's very subjective. It's whatever translation speaks to you the most, is easiest for you to comprehend. That's the one you should use. I mean, there's definitely some that are sketchier than others, but it's the best translation is the one that makes you read the Bible, the one that makes you feel comfortable reading the Bible. So, out of curiosity, I googled what the best one was, and this is New Revised Standard Version is the one that they said. So let's see what the heathen Google's Bible translation has to say about the Tower of Babel and the Descendants of Shem. All right, so we'll start. So it starts. Now the whole earth had one language and the same words. And as they migrated from the east, they came upon a plain in the land of Shinar and settled there. Excellent first verse. We're off to a great start. Now, some people might be confused about this part because Genesis 10 talked about the different tribes and languages and how everyone was spread out. But here in the next chapter, it's saying how everyone spoke the same language and was in the same place. Some even go as far to say there's a contradiction even. However, this is just another example of how ancient Hebrew writers care more about literary devices than accurate historical chronology. Genesis 10 acts as a teaser for what is to come. hinting at the problem to arise, and like make you ask like, oh, I wonder, how did humanity get scattered and as diverse as they did? And if the people of that time did what God told them to do, it'd be assumed that it just happened naturally. But in this chapter, Genesis 11, we find out that it's actually due to disobedience, and another fuck up by humanity that God had to correct. But in Genesis 12, a little spoiler, you'll see the full correction, or like a better word for that probably would be the solution and promise of salvation with Abraham, which we'll get into later, obviously. But just so you're aware now, Hebrew writers were trying to put the problem and the solution right next to each other without interrupting it with some like semi-irrelevant genealogy. You'll also see later how they were trying to get the genealogies to look a certain way in order to reflect something, so they couldn't like break the they couldn't like have a genealogy up to the point that's relevant, and then like once they like talked about the Tower of Babel, then continue. But we'll get into that later, but you'll see that. For now, I just want to say, Hebrew writers were trying to organize the text in a certain way that didn't have to do with recording in an accurate chronological order, and that's fine. Just because something isn't written in order doesn't mean it's not accurate or it's not true. It's just confusing if you don't know that it's not written in order. That's all. So I just want to make sure that point was clarified. Anyways, moving on. And they said to one another, "Come, let us make bricks and burn them thoroughly." And they had brick for stone and asphalt. Other translations say tar. Notably, the same thing used for the ark. Not sure which is correct, but that's just so you know. But they used asphalt for mortar. Then they said, "Come, let us build ourselves a city and a tower with its top in the heavens, and let us make a name for ourselves. Otherwise we shall be scattered abroad upon the face of the whole earth." So I want to make sure we're on the same page with this. God told Noah and his descendants to go multiply and fill the earth, as in he wants them to spread out. But here they said, no, let's all just stay in one place instead. So that's some direct disobedience there right off the bat. They're also making this giant, very strong, probably waterproof tower. Asphalt's probably also waterproof, but tar definitely is waterproof if that's what they were using. Possibly they were worried God would break his promise and send another flood, and they wanted to be prepared for that. So there's a lack of trust, which, if you might actually think that that's reasonable, because he did just kind of wipe all of humanity out off the face of the earth. But you should also consider the fact that God gave the people multiple warnings that he was going to kill everyone before he did, and he even gave a way out for those who wanted to get out of that, but the catch was they had to trust that he was actually going to follow through and murder everybody, and that this would be the way out, which nobody did. It was just Noah and his family. But no, also, the part where they said that they wanted to make a name for themselves, specifically this would apply to Nimrod, who you might recall from the last chapter was the king of Babel. He wanted to be the big bad of Earth, This links back to chapter 6, actually, about the Nephilim, men of renown, which can also be translated as men of the name. Those whose only goal in life is to make a name for themselves on Earth. There actually is some debate as to whether the Nephilim were actually descendants from demons, or if they were simply men who claimed to be sons of God, implying they themselves are gods. I suppose you could take it both ways. I personally prefer the more supernatural approach. That's what a lot of other scholars seem to think, looking at the surrounding evidence, and it just makes sense to me. Or maybe I just think it'd be cool if that's what it was. But it doesn't super matter. That's just my hot take. So moving on. The Lord came down to the city and the tower which mortals had built. And the Lord said, "Look, they are one people, and they have all one language, and this is only the beginning of what they will do. Nothing they propose to do will now be impossible for them. Come, let us go down." Real quick note, note the us. Let us go down, which is generally taken to be Trinity language. It's proof that the Old Testament did in fact feature a Trinitarian God, and possibly it was actually Jesus himself alone, or at least like partially alone. Probably the Spirit was with him too, but it was Jesus that came down to do a look-see, since the Father tends to be a little bit distant, as most tend to be. I just want to point that out real quick. So, let us go down and confuse their language there, so they will not understand one another's speech. So, just to summarize real quick, God is seeing the ambitious potentials of the united men and realizes he has to break them up like BFFs in a classroom. This is notably less violent than a flood, and it gave us some beautiful diversity, which God wanted in the first place. So I say we ultimately got off easy with this one. Enduring Word would like to note that languages are too complicated to have been developed by early humans themselves, and I don't know, that might be true. I'm not a linguist, and I do take everything that Enduring Word says with a bit of salt. They have a tendency to exaggerate some things, but that's what they said. So that, I don't know, I just want to throw that in there if it is true. That's an interesting way to put it. So the next verse. So the Lord scattered them abroad from there over the face of all the earth, and they left off the building the city. Therefore it was called Babel, because there the Lord confused the language of all the earth, and from there the Lord scattered them abroad over the face of all the earth. Okay. So we're getting into the long discussion part now, so buckle in. So anyone who grew up Christian is pretty familiar with this story, and they probably get like the gist of it, of what it's like supposed to mean. The Babylonians, specifically Nimrod, wanted to be famous and seen as on par with divine beings, so they made a super big tower, which made God go like, nah, and got everyone confused and scattered with different languages, and that's why we currently have to learn French and Spanish in high school. So pride is bad. One thing you do will put you on God's level, and don't go chasing waterfalls, blah, 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 basic stuff, right? Nothing wrong with this interpretation. I'm not saying it's wrong, but, my guy, Dr. Heiser, wants to go a little further than it being just a failed vanity project for humans. When asked why the world is the way it is, why is there so much suffering? Most Christians say it's because of Adam and Eve, and just leave it at that. But a lot of Jewish people would add that it was also because of what happened in Babel. The tree made us sinners, but Babel made us divided. And that division carries through the rest of the Old Testament, and also through to today, if we're being honest. Babel became the catalyst for why God had to make a covenant with Israel specifically instead of all of humanity. You've seen throughout Genesis so far how God kept trying to make paradise for everyone, but then would have to keep working around humanity's failures. So first the thing with the tree, and then the thing with Cain, and later the thing with the Nephilim, at least once, possibly twice. So now we know God can't get all of humanity on board. So after Babel, that was the last chance. So after that, it was just Abraham's descendants that could be a part of God's covenant to help create a paradise, followed by David's, and then we ended up with the Messiah, who opened it back up for everyone. I'm getting a little ahead of myself there, though. Taking it back, God was trying to start over with Noah's descendants, and then they pulled this, like, Babel shit, and maybe what God did seems like an overreaction, like it's just a tall building. Google says it was about 100 meters tall, probably. The world's tallest building right now that's in Dubai, it's a little over 8 times that. It's like 800 meters. And you don't see God smiting Dubai in any way. It's actually a bit of an oasis in the Middle East, all things considered. So, what's the deal with that? What's going on here? Well, to be clear, God doesn't have a problem with tall buildings, but he does have a problem with the intentions behind why they were built. Like I said before, this wasn't just a vanity project. If you know the history of it, you'd know it was actually meant to mimic a mountain, which at the time was considered to be where gods and other divine beings lived. They were really attempting to create a structure that brought divine beings to them, almost like a portal or just like a meeting point. Most likely, according to Dr. Heiser anyways, it wasn't God himself they were trying to build a place for, but one of the rebellious angels, or as I like to call them, demons. I'm not actually sure if that's the correct term. Like, they're definitely like in that demon category. But Heiser, he wrote this book about the actual bureaucratic structure of the divine council and the spiritual rebellion, and there's actually different names for a lot of them that specifically say what exactly they are. And I haven't read the book yet. So I just simplified. I just call them demons as a blanket term. Heiser is actually a proponent of God delegating his divine council various tasks on earth, essentially making them like lesser gods. Not because he couldn't handle earth by himself, but because he just wanted divine beings to be involved in running things with earth. He just likes to let people be involved with things. He could do it by himself, but he is love. He likes to have groups with him. He's a very extroverted person. So, but I don't want to get too involved or too heavy into this, because again, I haven't read the book yet. This is just what I've gleaned from the Naked Bible podcast, and I don't want to assume and misinform, but the divine council does get corrupted. I'm not sure if it's all or some, but there is a rebellion in there, and this is where you get the sons of God creating Nephilim and claiming themselves to be gods. Hence why I like to call some of the pagan gods demons, because if they were actually real, not just man-made statues, then that means they were angels on the divine council before rebelling and claiming a nation unrightfully as theirs, and or getting frisky with humans, which would make them demons. Anytime an angel does something that God does not approve of, they just automatically become demons because they should know better. The flood was meant to wipe out the humans involved in this spiritual rebellion, but I assume floods don't do much to spiritual beings, which is why you see them popping up again at the Tower of Babel. Assuming it is, in fact, Nephilim being referenced here. I'm just making that assumption because they're saying men who want to make a name for themselves. And it's kind of got that same vibe to it. It could have just been guys that tried to do that. The other assumption is that one of these rebellious lesser gods, possibly called Marduk, because that's what they think the tower was made for, was for this god named Marduk. So we're going to go with that. They think that he gained some influence in Babel and had the people create a tower for him. So you can see the Nephilim and rebellious sons of God trying to make a comeback in a very congested city, and therefore, as we all know by now, has a very high infection rate. And God's not dealing with that again, hence the scattering, which is arguably a lot less harsh than the flood. He basically just made them do what they were supposed to do anyways. So that was nice of him, I guess. God, but to continue, God loves unity, but only when it's used for good, when it revolves around love, also known as him. He is love. Unity in evil is obviously bad. Think of Nazis or the two-party system in America, Babel was united against love and was about to create a very egotistical monument that would have caused great suffering under Nephilim and demonic rule. So God had to end humanity's ability to unite consistently for their own safety. It's an unfortunate but necessary sacrifice. Rest in peace, human unity. Even so, though, God being a proponent of free will, he let the Babylonians who remained in Babel after the incident to keep their, God, quote unquote. There's some translations in Deuteronomy that have God dividing the nations in Babel, when people start splitting up. He divided them according to the sons of Israel. However, these are outdated, as the Dead Sea Scrolls actually say that they were divided according to the sons of God. Keep in mind, Israel doesn't even exist yet, so this actually makes a lot more sense. It also implies that the nations were put under the authority of the divine council. I'm not sure if this was before or after they rebelled, because I still need to read that book. But I think maybe it was before, and they were meant to have more of a behind-the-scenes bureaucratic role, working on behalf of God. But the power just got to their heads, and they just claimed themselves to be gods. Hence what happened in Babel, and also the flood probably. But I could also see it happening after they rebelled too, because either way, instead of destroying them, God lets them be gods, quote unquote, little g, gods. Humanity chose these gods, and God isn't generally the one to get in the way of personal choice. So he disinherits these nations that want a different god. He lets these other gods adopt them, I guess. And it's a bit of a smug decision. Oh, you think this god is better? Well, okay. You guys try it your way for now, but I'm gonna circle back to this, and then we'll see, and we do see, whenever there are man-made or just corrupt divine beings, God consistently asserts his authority over these idols whenever they get in his way, both back then and now. God, this is where we get language God of gods, Lord of lords. God reclaims the nations, etc. He lets these demons have their fun, lets them have these heathen nations, but God is the real one in control, and he leaves the door open for these heathen nations to come to their senses, stop following these lesser gods. Even during the Old Testament time, salvation isn't completely as race-based as it seems. Israel is in fact meant to be that door, that example to others of what they're missing out on. But Israel turned out to be more of a broken window than a door, hence why Jesus ends up having to show up. the rest of the Old Testament ends up essentially being an Israel versus the disinherited nations, like a constant fight between God and the rebels. But with Jesus, the broken window becomes an open door with very few stipulations. You actually see a moment of reversal on the Babel decision when well, I guess technically not a moment, because it's still something that can happen. It's just not a constant thing. But you see this first moment of reversal on the Babel decision when the disciples receive the Holy Spirit and they start speaking in tongues. They weren't, keep in mind, they weren't just like in someone's basement, babbling nonsense no one could understand. If you look it up in Acts 2:2, where it happens, they were in the bustling and diverse city of Jerusalem, and for a moment they gained the ability to preach the good news to all these people who all spoke different languages. Language stopped being a barrier for the first time since Babel. There was, for a moment, unity and understanding, a teaser of what will come in the end. I think it's just amazing to see how every curse we received and deserved, if we're being honest, is lifted by the Messiah, and how it gives us a glimpse of the true and full paradise that is still to come. But mostly, I just wanted to deepen the understanding of the context of the spiritual warfare that happened during Babel and continued to happen after Babel. I think I did. So we're going to finally move on to the super fun genealogy part. So let me actually take a drink, because this isn't going to be a mouthful. Okay. So these are the descendants of Shem. When Shem was 100 years old, he became the father of Arpachshad 2 years after the flood. And Shem lived after the birth of Arpachshad 500 years and had other sons and daughters. When Arpachshad had lived 35 years, he became the father of Shelah. And Arpachshad lived after the birth of Shelah 403 years and had other sons and daughters. When Shelah had lived 30 years, he became the father of Eber. Actually, I think it's Eber. Yeah, Eber. And Shelah lived after the birth of Eber 403 years and had other sons and daughters. When Eber had lived 34 years, he became the father of Peleg, and Eber lived after the birth of Peleg 430 years and had other sons and daughters. When Peleg had lived 30 years, he became the father of Reu, and Peleg lived after the birth of Reu 209 years and had other sons and daughters. So just real quick to remind everyone, this is new information now. In Genesis 10, the genealogy ended after Peleg's brother Joktan's sons, and we never hear what happened to Peleg's descendants, or like who they were. So now we're getting into Peleg's lineage. So to continue, when Reu had lived 32 years, he became the father of Serug, and Reu lived after the birth of Serug 207 years and had other sons and daughters. When Serug had lived 30 years, he became the father of Nahor, and Serug lived after the birth of Nahor 200 years and had other sons and daughters. When Nahor had lived 29 years, he became the father of Terah, and Nahor lived after the birth of Terah 119 years and had other sons and daughters. When Terah had lived 70 years, he became the father of Abram, Nahor, and Haran. So that was a fun little mouthful. Thankfully, the contextual background of this is slightly more interesting than the Table of Nations. So let's start with some fun analysis. So there's 12 names listed in this one, assumedly symbolizing that this is the start of the 12 nations of Israel. There's also 10 generations listed, which reflect the 10 generations in Genesis 5 from Adam to Noah. But also, they both also end with someone having 3 sons. But an interesting difference, Genesis 5's genealogy focused on death. Remember the phrase, "and then he died," over and over. Shem's genealogy in this chapter focuses more on life. He lived another X number of years and also had other sons and daughters. Clearly trying to mark a new era, post-flood that was full of life and prosperity. Adam and Eve's descendants were cursed to death, while Noah's descendants were given life, being the start of Abraham. You'll see some reflection with Shem and Abraham, who both had kids when they were 100. There's other numerological metaphors and comparisons. I'm too tired to explain, as they are more complicated and possibly more dubious, and I don't really feel like researching it, so I'm just going to be linking the WordPress blog I found on it, and I'll let you guys figure it out. So, moving on now. Now these are the descendants of Terah. Terah was the father of Abram, Nahor, and Haran was the father of Lot. We remember Lot. Haran died before his father Terah in the land of his birth in Ur in Chaldeans. Abram and Nahor took wives. The name of Abram's wife was Sarai, and the name of Nahor's wife was Milcah. She was the daughter of Haran, the father of Milcah and Iscah. Now, Sarai was barren, and she had no child. Had is the key phrase there. Abram actually means father, so I assume Terah had some prophetic idea of what was in store for him. I wonder how he felt then, when he married an infertile woman. Sarai's name does in fact mean controversial, which is both delightful and very telling. So maybe that's how he felt when his supposedly very fertile son married an infertile woman. But mostly, I just wanted to point out this cute thing about Abram, soon to be known as Abraham. He is, no doubt, one of a handful of very key figures in the Bible. Other characters had pretty clear and important roles they were known for. Moses was a legislator, Joshua was a general, Elijah was the prophet, King David, great king, decent king. He was a very important king in the Bible. Some would look at Abraham and wonder what he was known or used for, just being a sperm donor, father of Israel. But actually looking at other books in the Bible, you'll see that they considered Abraham to be the friend of God, just simply God's friend. All these great and skill-based roles started with a simple and committed friendship. Not all of us have the calling for great roles that promote the kingdom on a grand scale. We might even struggle promoting the kingdom on a small scale, but all of us are capable of being friends with God. And I think if you can focus on that first, see God as your literal friend, your abilities in the commission will get stronger. It might not take you to a grand scale, but you will see a difference, at least in your perspective. Being friends with God is foundational to doing anything in the kingdom of heaven and on earth. Without it, you have nothing. So never forget, you always have a friend in Jesus. And what a friend we have. Just couldn't resist. Anyways, last bit. Terah took his son Abram and his grandson Lot, son of Haran, and his daughter-in-law Sarai, his son Abram's wife, and they went out together from Ur of the Chaldeans to go into the land of Canaan. but when they came to Haran, they settled there. The days of Terah were 205 years, and Terah died in Haran. So, in the next chapter, this gets switched around a little, and you'll see God telling Abram to go directly to Canaan, versus here where it's just Terah just kind of took his family and left. Maybe, possibly, God told Terah first to go, but maybe Terah didn't commit, so then God started nagging Abram instead. At the very least, Terah got the strange urge to move his family to Canaan, and gave up about halfway through and just died. And then God just told Abram to finish the journey. Enduring Word assumes that God told Terah to go first for sure. They evidence that by saying, Terah means delay, and Haran means barren or dry, according to them, though Google says that Haran actually means mountaineer, which makes more sense since Haran is also his son's name, and I assume he named the place after his dead son, and it'd be weird to name your son barren or dry. So, but Terah's name has many meanings, but one in fact does mean delay, so I'll give him that much. Enduring Word then tries to make the case that Terah delayed the move to Canaan, which resulted in them staying in a dry and barren place, symbolizing how God actually left them because they did not fully obey his command to go to Canaan, or at least God boycotted them until they obeyed fully. However, I don't see any evidence of that in the text beyond their sketchy name etymology, at least not the part where God left them. I think it's more likely Terah got too old for travel and had to stop in Haran where he died, maybe even naming the place Haran so he could be with his son in death. And Abram was likely grieved by this, so he probably stayed in Haran when God felt, sorry, I said that wrong. So he stayed in Haran so he could be with his son's death. He likely grieved this, so he probably stayed in Haran. And when God felt he grieved enough, he told him to move on, and it looks like he did without question or hesitation. If you look at the next chapter, it is, however, interesting that the text says Terah died instead of he lived until he was 205 and had other sons and daughters like they do in the genealogy. A lot of scholars say that Terah was, in fact, an idol worshiper, and this confirms he may not have died in good standing with God, though it's hard to be sure. The math doesn't super help either, as it doesn't specify Terah's age milestones. All we know is by the time he was 70, he had 3 sons, and then he died at 205 in Haran. In the next chapter, it says Abram left Haran at 75, and even assuming Abram was the youngest born right when Terah was 70, that would make Terah 145 when Abram leaves, which is before Terah dies. I guess you could, well, no, that wouldn't make sense either. I was gonna say, maybe Terah was a little bit older, but then by 70 he had 3 kids, so he had to have had at least Abram by he was 70. Abram would have to be 130 when Terah dies, which is way into Abram being in Canaan and having Isaac. Though there's no mention of him in later chapters, there's a chance that Abram left Terah in Haran before he died. This actually might make more sense since in the next chapter, God tells him to leave his father's household. If Terah was dead, it'd be one of his son's households because of, inheritance and all. You know, like I said before, Terah is noted as being an idol worshiper, so maybe they had a falling out over religious matters, and was just never in Abram's life after he left Haran. Or maybe God just told Abram to leave, and he just left, and Terah never questioned that. Or maybe they're just honoring the dead by still referring to it as their father's household. You know, there's also the fact that some scholars say that the ages of the people in the Bible are sometimes not literal, but they take on some like metaphorical meaning. So maybe this is all just based on nothing, you know. I'm also not great at math, so you know, but I still say it's too much to say Terah or Abram only partially obeyed God, so God left them until they fully obeyed. At least the God abandoning them part seems a little sketchy, but again, I'm just a layperson. What do I know? I'm actually more excited that we're now done with chapter 11. We can finally get into the Bible Project video about Genesis 1 through 11. You know, now that we got this far. Except I've actually been especially exhausted this week, and also now, I don't know if you can tell, so I don't really feel like saying anything about it, but it is a good summary of everything that we've covered so far story-wise, and it's all under 10 minutes, so I'm going to link that video in the sources as bonus content. I think they also did a video on the Tower of Babel, so I might link that too. Because, you know, that might be a nice extra perspective. But they also have a part 2 for the Genesis book that goes over the rest of Genesis. So maybe you could watch that as well. So you have a good overview of what we're going to be getting into next week. Or maybe you just want to wait about like 40 weeks so you have a nice wrap-up summary at the end. I'll let you guys decide what you want to do on that. But so concludes this week's chapter study. So if anyone has any prayer requests or updates, comments or questions, definitely post them now or at your earliest convenience. But you know, until we hear from you, again, or next week, I don't know. I'm going to be closing us out in prayer, and then we're going to go on to the next video, which has the very fun loud worship. So, we actually got some updates for the prayer requests, which I'm very excited about. People finally told me what was going on in their lives, so that's cool. So one of the two women, she said it was actually okay to use her name. So Mimi is her name. She has said that she has been in a lot of pain lately, and also in a really bad depression, which is why I haven't been hearing from her in a bit. So that's why. But she said that it's getting a lot better now. She's got some surgeries lined up and some treatments, and she's starting to get out of the depression, you know, which is why I now know that because I heard from her. So we're going to pray for and we're going to encourage progress on that. I also have another friend who I forgot to ask if she wants her name to be said. So the other woman, who has the same problem as Mimi, she still needs a diagnosis for an ailment revolving around her heart. But she's also, she did have a mental breakdown as well, which is also why I didn't hear from her for a while. But she's getting out of that. So yeah, we're just going to pray for progress on that as well. My dad has been saying that his relationship with his wife is improving, so that's super awesome, so we're going to pray for that. And then my mom didn't have any updates, it's just the same stuff. So she needs to find a church and a job and stay out of depression. And then for me, I don't know. I've had a little bit of an emotional roller coaster this week. I had, like I said, a lot of friends coming back into my life after I haven't heard from them in a few months, and I feel like I should be very happy about that, and I kind of am, but I'm also, I don't know, it kind of gave me some emotional whiplash, and it made me, I don't know, it kind of just reminded me how unreliable people are. So I don't know. I'm kind of struggling with I guess disappointment and a little bit resentment and just kind of like self-esteem issues. So yeah, I don't know what to pray about that. I'll think about it when we get to me. I'll let the Lord tell me what to say about that. So yeah. If my mother has any updates on the church friends job thing, certainly let me know at some point. And then we also should probably pray for my grandparents who are in charge of a church in Oregon. So we're just going to pray for that. All right. Gonna do the prayer now. So God, thank you for everyone who's watching this. Many thanks to them. I just want to pray for my family up in Oregon who are in charge of a church, just help that church grow, but make it like a quality growth, not like a just get as many people as possible kind of growth. Like make it every single person in that church has a connection to that church. There's very good fellowship and there's very strong spiritual connection to you. Keep those relationship qualities super high because that's what church is for. I also would like to pray for my mother who's still looking for a church and also a job. Keep her from getting especially depressed about it because it's very hard to look for a church and also a job. It's just a lot lack. It's just a bit of a self-esteem killer. So just be with her on, guide her through that. I'd also like to pray for Mimi. Thank you for making her pain more manageable. Thank you for getting her out of that depression. Definitely encourage progress on that. I also pray for my other friend that she figures out what's going on with her. But I also thank you for helping her get out of that depression a bit. Thank you for helping her to get refreshed. I just pray that she feels your presence going forward and that she doesn't have a meltdown later, I guess. I guess it's kind of inevitable for people with mental illness. It's just like a roller coaster, but I hope that the next one doesn't take a huge toll on her and she's able to get out of the next one again and so forth, so on and so forth. I'd also like to pray for my dad. Thank you for putting peace and direction on the situation as we have been praying for. And I just want to encourage progress for that. And then I also pray for myself. I don't know, I guess help me to not have such horrible attachment issues, but I don't know. It's kind of like a balance, I guess, because I feel like you want me to have friends, but at the same time, I get overly attached to my friends, and then when I get overly attached to my friends, you have a tendency to take them away from me, which upsets me. So it's a lot of back and forth, and then I have to lean on you, and then once I feel like I'm getting better, then I get my friends back, but then, sometimes I don't trust the friends now, so I don't know, I guess you know what I need, so just do that. I just help me to keep me from feeling like shit all the time. that's really all I really want, and I guess just give me what I need from that. But yeah, so that's about it. Thank you, God, for being here with us always. Thank you for watching my videos. Because even if nobody watches my videos, I know at least you watch my videos, so thank you for that. And with that said, thank you, amen. Yeah, I did it. I did a prayer. So thank you for coming to the Bible study. If for those watching on YouTube, there is a loud worship song, which I'm sure you saw when you looked at the quiet worship song, but underneath the quiet worship song there's a loud worship song, and I highly encourage you to click on that link and listen to it. But you know, for those on Facebook, I'm just gonna end the video and I'm just gonna make another video where I can play that song and do like a live thing of it. It's actually gonna be a hip-hop song, because I thought, you know, we started with a country song, we should end with a hip-hop song, because they're basically, country and hip-hop have very similar vibes, I feel like. You know, they don't sound the same, but they're about the same things for the most part. So stick around for that. Okay, well, bye, see you next week.